the tech adoption and the diffusion of tech, what used to take decades is now compressed into months.
Welcome to Divot, the community for people making their mark on the world, where each week I sit down with the greatest minds in business, tech, sports, and entertainment to uncover the moments, decisions, and lessons that shape their journey so you can shape yours. Go to divot.org to learn more. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
Divot.
Today, we're at the historic Golden Gate Club in San Francisco, with Mayfield Fund hosting the nominees of the first ever Divot AI list, where we sit down with one of the most influential builders shaping the future of AI. Aparna Chennapragada is the Chief Product Officer for AI Experience at Microsoft. She's redefining productivity through intelligent agents, next-generation co-pilot experiences, and new visual and creative AI tools designed to transform how people work, think, and create. Aparna's career spans more than 2 decades. She founded Google Lens. She led YouTube's recommendation systems and guided critical product decisions across Google Search and AR. She later served as Chief Product Officer at Robinhood. Today, she brings that 0 to 1 mindset to Microsoft, where she serves on the boards of eBay and previously on the board of Capital One. Hope you enjoy it. How is product building changing with this rapid iteration of AI that's hit us over the last few years?
I've been at the forefront of the internet shift, and then, of course, with cloud and mobile, and now with this version of AI. And I think often one of the questions that comes up is, well, is it this time is different? Like, is that true, or is it just that like folks haven't lived through all of these previous shifts? And I would say there are 2 things that I am in the middle of that I feel like is dramatically different. One is that the tech adoption and the diffusion of tech, what used to take decades, is now compressed into months, right? And, I was telling somebody that, remember the Breed is Good, what's the Wall Street movie, the giant brick phone that the guy had, Michael Douglas had in that movie what's that? Yeah, no, it was this iridium giant brick phone. It was in the 90s. To like fast forward to my uncle in a small town in India getting a phone, it was a good 2.5 decades, right? Whereas I think if you look at the AI adoption, it's happening in months. So that's different. And I think as builders, that has meant a pace that just we haven't seen before. Because every few months, you're kind of updating your priors. What used to be not possible with the model, you've built a product and now you realize the model is eating the product.
How is iteration of product development different than it was before AI? How are you seeing people inside of Microsoft iterate more quickly than before?
I think a couple of different ways. So one is the what itself, like what we are building has changed. Like, again, the first phase was just add AI, right? Like we all saw it. Microsoft did the same thing, a bunch of other folks, which is like, let's add chat to existing, meet users where they are. If you're in an IDE, if you're in like Word, PowerPoint, figure out a way where chatbots can help. And that's not surprising. Like that's how I think about it, the previous platform shifts happened too. I distinctly remember when I was at Akamai, the first website was like a scanned brochure, but like a coupon savings thing, scanned brochure as a PDF, and we called that the website. So I do think that that's happening right now. That was the first phase. But I think now we are seeing in Microsoft and outside, going from this just add AI to like AI native, meaning look at the entire workflow and think about what an agent at work can do here.
I remember with mobile when the Facebook app came out, and it was sort of this revelation. It was like, oh, how did you fit that in? It's like, no, this group of very talented people designed an app specifically, a Facebook app specifically for mobile, and it was it's like, wow, that makes sense, but it's also crazy. And now what you just said makes a lot of sense. Like, how do you think about when building, like with the web, we're building for the web, we're building for mobile. How is it different for building a product or website with sort of AI first?
Yeah, so I'll give you like super practical ways that I see. Like our team, for example, has been building these agents for work, right? So think about if you're a new employee today, you get a badge and a PC. But what are the 5 or 6 set of like virtual agents that you should get as a new employee? So in doing that, in building that, one of the fascinating things is like previously we would do PRDs, right? Like write the product spec and like go through, get together and get the customer behavior. Now, like we start with the prompts, right? The prompt sets are the new PRDs. That's a very different way. And then the corollary to that, what we're seeing is if you don't have evals and benchmarks, it's just not an AI product that's worth its salt. You're not serious people. If you're not looking at like evals and benchmark, which is a very different muscle group, because if you think about it, the previous version of that was testing, QA and testing. But benchmarks are the new QA.
It's interesting too, because I've, in my own experience, found that designers now are sort of unlocked to do, most great designers in my experience also are really good front end people at minimum. But now I find that some of the best designers that I work with, they're saying, hey, I can take this all the way basically to the back end. It's going to be like, if you ever talk to a designer about their design, it's like, it always gets chopped and cut and, and pixels get messed up and all this stuff. And now it's like, no, I have so much power now. I'm empowered to do so much and take it so far. And then, as you're saying, now we're iterating and getting users in faster, and then using vibe coding or whatever tools we're using to then speed up iteration. It's this really incredible and exciting time.
Yeah, I mean, I think with design, I have to say, like, there's a couple things happening. Like the who is also changing. So in our teams, for example, I have like a very barbell team. So one is what I call the model whisperers, the folks who are super close to the LLMs, and they're really, really, deep in the weeds there in terms of whether it's RL or like post training and so on. And the other side of the barbell is not these traditional swim lanes. So actually, yesterday I was sitting in a meeting where we did have designers for forever have had to kind of ask the front end engineers to say, you didn't quite do it the right way. Like the craft isn't all the way there. And now we have vibe code. They've actually vibe coded it all the way to production, right? So that the swim lanes are blurring, and it's, to me, like it's cliche to say this, but you have designers who can code, you have engineers with taste, you have like product managers who can prototype. So it's all like product builders in one end, and then you have the model whisperers. That's the new team composition even.
How do you personally stay ahead of what's happening? It feels like we're going to all be here today. People are going to try desperately not to look at their phones. But it's like every day something new is happening that can sometimes totally shift the landscape. What are you doing to make sure you're staying at the front of innovation in AI?
The first thing I do is I build things, which I think is like, I talk to a lot of executives and folks who are kind of like one level of indirection or three levels of indirection, because that's been the hierarchy, right? So I joke saying there is a revenge of the nerd executive. The nerd executive is back. I'm proud to say I'm one of them. And I build, that does mean like there's a second shift, because you have your day job and then you're kind of like trying to figure out, okay, like if you connect cloud code with these MCPs, suddenly like one of them goes down, you have to kind of mess around a lot. But I just don't see any shortcut other than like going through it. But the best part about this is like you can kind of, there's no other way to get intuition for where the models are kind of jagged if you don't actually build them. That's one thing I do. The second thing I do is I'm also starting to get the team to be much more focused on prototyping versus kind of talking about it, right? And kind of actually we have a boot camp, for example. We pulled a few of the folks and said, you're going to do a 2-week boot camp. We'll give you tokens. We'll give you like a bunch of tools, first party, third party, pick like a project, and then go at it. And that's part of the job. Like it's not another thing that you have to do. Can I confess and tell you what I don't do as well? I'm terminally online. And I feel like one of the things that I can't peel my eyes off is like the fact that there's, even as we speak, I'm sure there's some model being dropped somewhere. And so I don't think I've quite gotten the hang of like the FOMO of it, especially because some of these are big step functions, right? When the first reasoning model came up, O1, and Mark's here in the group somewhere, I just feel like that was the moment where I pulled together folks and say, hey guys, we are going from question answering to agents that can do long running things. It's a big shift.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about thin steps versus fat steps. What does that mean?
This is more, I think, as if you're builders, actually, even for investors, one of the things I keep thinking about is code gen is a good example where code generation and like engineering resources were the fat steps in an organization, right? Typically, you kind of like that's why you had to measure twice and like cut once and so on. Lots of like gates to get to it. But now code is cheap. In fact, one of the weekend projects I've been working on, I basically like wrote a bunch of code and then asked for an emergent design spec from it, right? Like come up with the design doc based on the code. So what used to be a fat step, like code gen, has now become a thin step. And so and that leads to new fat steps, right? So I have a senior engineer in our team who's like, I can't use my eyeballs and review a whole bunch of the code that's being generated. So there's an opportunity for builders to say, what are the new fat steps and how can you build software tools for that?
It feels like Microsoft as a company is really adopted AI and is adapting to AI. But for those on your team that are maybe more resistant or just not first mover on these kinds of things, how are you pushing them or like encouraging them to get on board and really bring AI into their workflows?
Yeah, and I think there are two camps here, right? One camp is the one that's actually building AI products. They're and I include myself. We are sufficiently AI built. Like
No extra motivation needed.
yeah, no motivation needed. But there is a second camp where the day-to-day job doesn't require immediately kind of you building a lot of AI products. So there's no contact as much. For them, I think it's been a lot more of both bottom up and top down. So one of the things I keep saying is you gotta actually think of this as a contact sport and get into the habit of using AI. And I give examples. I showed them the browser extension that I built, which is, anytime you open a new tab, it says, hey, like, can you do what you're doing using AI? Right? It's just as Toby at Shopify calls this the reflexive AI usage. It's not reflexive for a lot of people, but that's a big advantage.
What are some of the investable thesis around Microsoft?
I mean, I think one thing that I would say is one of the questions that comes up is, well, like all these hyperscalers, like what's the way to think about what's the mental model around where the models are going, where the hyperscalers are going, and where the white space is for startups. And I'll share a couple thoughts there. I think a year ago, I feel like every few months we swing between the model first or the app first. In coding, for example, it's all model or it's all IDE and then back and forth. And I think there's a third thing, which is it's system, right? So for example, GitHub is a great example where you have your repo, you have your system, and of course, every part of like your workflow will be changed by the model. So I think the number one thing to think about is where are places where the model is going to eat the product? You don't want to be there, right? As a builder and as a startup. The second thing I'd say is for us in Microsoft, we think about this more in terms of an L-shaped, right? So there's, in my area, we look at horizontal productivity. We look at, hey, what are the broad productivity agents that can work for you? Or Azure as a platform, this layered cake of Azure, GitHub, and then like specific productivity agents. So the L here is if you're working on something deeply vertical and specialized, it's a great complementary way to like work together. The other day I was working with, I was talking to a CEO of a company that's really focused on, hyper vertical finance agents, which is perfect for like an Excel and our kind of analysis and horizontal productivity. You're never going to kind of like build the expense report, like, AI version of that, right? The other one is I would say Microsoft is big enough that, and I think our posture is much more lean forward, that there's multiple ways, the Azure platform itself, the core AI platform. And then of course, there are all these like product integrations that would be great.
Do you think with the ease at which it is to now code and get products to market, does it mean that companies like Microsoft end up acquiring fewer startups? Or if they make acquisitions, it really is more team focused than product focused? Or do you think it is similar to previous cycles over the last 10 or 15 years?
We just came out of the Just Add AI phase, which naturally kind of incumbents are more in tune to use because again, you meet users where they are, the existing workflows. Um, but I think the next phase where you rethink entire workflows, that's actually the startups have a great advantage there in terms of rethinking things, right? And to me, actually, one of the striking ways I see it is, I mean, typically we do talk about it even before AI, that speed versus scale trade-off, right? Startups are great because they're fast, incumbents scale. But with the AI stuff, I'm actually seeing an additional advantage of being small, even in a big company. And here's the nuance there. So if you have a small team, what I find is that they lean a lot more on the models. They're getting a lot more on the LLMs themselves and just like underlying model to do a lot more things than putting a whole bunch of over engineering because, engineers want to engineer. And so in a weird way, like I think small is actually helpful even in scale. The other thing that I'm seeing, the reason why I do think that startups have a very good shot is I think the data flywheel is something that we haven't really cracked as an industry yet, right? I mean, in code gen, for example, as users use the product, how does that go back into the model? Typically, we've thought about UI as something that humans look at and you interact. We've designed products for usability, right? Now, I think we'll start to design products for learnability, meaning how do you kind of like collect those signals? Let's say you're a startup and you have a front end that the user is using. You click through a bunch of these things. How does that feed back into the model and make that smarter for you? And those are things that, the field is level for startups or incumbents.
Yeah. So the model understands what's happening and then there's the next phase where it can iterate off of what it's learning and self-improve in some ways.
Yeah, and the self-improvement, and this is actually the next phase of product making. It is not going to just happen with more and more data because the web data, everybody has access to it. So I think the next phase of advantage for building even vertical products or horizontal is as you design your product, let's say you take your, I don't know, expense report filing, how do you have hooks within the UI? Typically, we think about UI as something that humans look at and like navigate and it's for usability. But if you can use the click signals or and design some rewardable primitives and then use that as a reinforcement learning mechanism.
You talked about small teams being successful inside of Microsoft. When you say small, what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, like a good example is there's like a 10-person team that I see, which has gone from like zero to like building like a functioning real like dog foodable prototype. And part of it is that the models are there here, so they don't have to do the heavy lifting. But part of it is using AI coding tools. Part of it is actually that as soon as you build the prototype, that was a dumb idea. Like it would have taken 6 months. And we're like, oh, bad ideas fail fast now.
What do you look for in startups? What gets you excited enough to jump into a tiny company with just with founders or small team and get excited about it?
There are 3 areas that I'm really excited about, not in my day job, but one I think is a version of parts of the web. If you rewrote the web that is written and read by agents versus humans, what would that look like? So for example, today, if you have a website, you're kind of like designing for humans. It's like, oh, you have a menu here, you have a layout here. The AI don't care about any of that shit, right? So how do you kind of like, if you have agentic search and agentic browsing, the entire stack of the web has to be rethought, right? How do you do serving? How do you do indexing? This is my past world. So I think that's ripe for startups to go attack that. That's one area. The second one I think of is model adjacent businesses. As a lot of the model businesses themselves are very token heavy, very compute heavy. So you'd expect that the hyperscalers and the frontier labs are going to do this. But I think there's a lot of like tools. I think Fireworks is somewhere here. Yes, I actually think that this idea of rethinking tools and infrastructure and middleware for an AI native cloud is another big area.
What is your advice to startups and founders trying to get that first relationship in with Microsoft? Where do you start? Do you start at the bottom? Do you cold email,
We have deep partnerships with both the startups as well as venture firms. And we just had our like day-long, hey, Microsoft for startups, and a very open-ended. We said, look, it's a layered cake, and it's not a very easy maze to navigate as many of these big companies are. So we are taking a bunch of our senior leaders and saying, we're going to kind of like lean forward and say, if you have an opportunity for partnership in the Azure side, like core infrastructure, and don't want anything else, that's fine. If you're looking at GitHub and saying if you're building coding related agents, great, that's partner. If you're building Office related M365 and enterprise stuff, we're here. So I think that's our posture to say like, come talk to us about anything that's meaningful. You'll figure out a way if it's complementary.
Aparna, Chief Product Officer, Microsoft, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Divot.
On next week's episode.
If you push the edge once, you get a lot of backlash. You push it twice, it's like crazy backlash. Push it 3 times, that's your personality, and you are allowed to push the edge.